My name is Hannah Delgado. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my life, my own family treated me like the potted plant in the corner of the room. Useful if you needed somewhere to toss a dying conversation. Invisible otherwise. To them, I was the steady one. The reliable one. The kid who would land on her feet, which is just a polite way of saying nobody felt the need to reach out a hand. Every drop of pride. Every long Facebook post. Every hand to the heart toast at dinner belonged to my younger sister, Brielle, and her glittering path through life. I got the occasional good job. Sweetie. Mumbled between sips of wine, while my mom waited for her phone to ping with a new update from her favorite daughter. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be Brielle's night. Again. Mom called it a little gathering to celebrate your sister's big engagement. Like I was just there to pour gravy and clear plates. Nobody at that table had any idea that 2 months earlier, I'd signed a stack of papers in a downtown Chicago conference room and walked out with more money wired into my name than everyone in that dining room had earned across their entire combined lifetimes. Nobody knew that the hobby they teased me about, the little side project my dad once called that cute software doodle, had just been acquired by one of the biggest names in logistics for $147 million. I sat at that long oak table, staring at a turkey nobody had bothered asking me to help cook, listening to my mother gush about the Tiffany ring on Brielle's finger like it was the Hope Diamond. Then my future brother-in-law, Trent, a finance guy who never missed an opportunity to remind a room he worked in finance, leaned across the table and made one smug joke too many about my quaint little warehouse job. I looked him dead in the eye, set my fork down, and said, very calmly, I sold my company last month. He laughed, took a sip of my dad's bourbon, and said, oh yeah, your cute little app thing. How much did that run you? $5,000. 10, I said. 147 million. My mother's wine glass tilted in her hand, spilling a red streak across the white tablecloth. My sister's mouth opened and stayed open. My dad blinked at me 3 times, like he was trying to clear a glitch in his vision. Trent made a sound I can only describe as a soft cough that got stuck halfway up his throat. What happened in the next 20 minutes cracked my family into pieces that we are still, to this day, trying to figure out how to glue back together. And before I tell you what my sister whispered to me in the hallway before I tell you what my father did with his dinner napkin and what my mother begged me for while I was putting on my coat, do me one small favor. Drop a comment down below, telling me what time it is, where you're watching from, and what state or country you're in. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And it helps me know who's listening. Okay, let me take you back to how I got here. Growing up as Hannah Delgado in the Chicago suburbs meant figuring out very early that in our house, love came with a scoreboard. And I was never the leading player. I was the older sister. The practice kid. My uncle once called me at a barbecue when he thought I couldn't hear. Brielle was 4 years younger. Blonde like my mother. Gifted et belle. Quick with a compliment. And gorgeous in every photograph my mom insisted on taking. I was the one who got strep throat twice a year, wore glasses by 3rd grade, and preferred taking our dad's old laptop apart to playing dress-up. When I won the county science fair in 7th grade for a project on supply chain optimization, yes. In middle school, my mother said, that's nice. Honey, did you see Brielle's new headshots from dance class? She looks like a little Cindy Crawford. The ribbon stayed in my sock drawer. Brielle's headshots got framed above the fireplace. When I got accepted into University of Illinois with a partial scholarship to study industrial engineering, my dad said, engineering? Whew, that's a serious major for a girl. Then he turned to Brielle. who was 15 and had just been offered a spot at a summer musical theater camp, and said, "Now that's the kind of spark people pay attention to." I laughed it off. That's what I'd trained myself to do. I moved out at 18, worked 2 jobs through college, and took my first real job, after graduation, at a regional distribution center outside Joliet. Not glamorous, not Instagram-worthy. But I saw things there nobody else wanted to see. I saw pallets moving in patterns that made no mathematical sense. I saw drivers idling for 2 hours because the warehouse couldn't tell them which dock to back in today. I saw a company bleeding money from 1,000 tiny cuts. My family heard warehouse and logistics and filed me away under works hard. Nothing interesting to report. My mother introduced me at her book club as Hannah, my oldest. She's in shipping. Brielle, who by then was getting an expensive theater degree at Northwestern that my parents were mostly paying for, once introduced me to a boyfriend as my sister. The one who, works at a UPS place, something like that. What none of them knew was that at night, after my shifts, I was sitting on the floor of my studio apartment in Bolingbrook with a second-hand MacBook, sketching out the bones of what would eventually become Gridline, a coordination platform for mid-sized logistics, firms the ones too big for spreadsheets, too small for expensive enterprise software. I met my co-founder, Brielle, in a night class on systems architecture. She was a back-end developer stuck at a soul-crushing insurance company. We got coffee after class one night. She sketched on a napkin. I sketched on another. And by midnight, we had the rough shape of something real. Priya and I made a deal at that table. On paper. In ink 50-50. Equal equity. Equal votes. Equal sweat. We shook on it, and I still have that napkin framed in my office. I'm telling you that now, because I know what you're going to wonder later. And I don't want there to be any confusion. Priya got every penny she deserved when we sold. She and her husband are building their dream house in Evanston right now, and she just sent me a photo of the foundation yesterday. For 3.5 years, I lived a split life. Day shifts at the warehouse. Nights and weekends coding. Pitching. Begging small logistics firms in the Midwest to try our beta for free. I lost 15 pounds. I didn't need to lose. I got so tired one morning, I rear-ended a parked car in my own apartment complex. When I finally asked my father if he'd co-sign a small business line of credit, so I could quit the warehouse and work on Gridline full-time. He laughed like I'd told him a knock-knock joke. "Sweetheart," he said. And I remember the exact tone of his voice, because I've replayed it 100 times. "Apps are a dime a dozen. Your sister's fiancé tried something like that in college and lost his shirt. Don't gamble what you've got. A steady check is nothing to sneeze at." Then my mom chimed in from the kitchen without even turning around. "Besides, Brielle's wedding is going to need everyone chipping in. And we don't want you overextended." I said, "Okay, Dad." And I drove home. And I sat in my car, in the parking lot of my apartment building, for 45 minutes without moving. Then I went upstairs and opened my laptop and worked until 4 in the morning. That was the night Gridline stopped being a side project and started being a mission. 2 years later, the calls started coming. First, a regional distributor in Cleveland wanted to license us. Then a nationwide freight brokerage wanted to do a pilot. Then, 3 months before this past Thanksgiving, a Fortune 500 logistics conglomerate sent us a letter of intent that made Priya call me at 2 in the morning, crying so hard I thought somebody had died. The final number. After 6 weeks of negotiation, lawyers, due diligence, And one terrifying moment where I thought the whole thing was going to fall apart over a non-compete clause was $147 million. After the investor slice, after taxes, after legal fees, after Priya's half, I still had more money than I knew how to process. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding. Not because I was ashamed. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. I knew my mother would immediately start hinting about the kitchen remodel she'd been saving up for. I knew my father would say something like, "Well, we raised you right, didn't we?" and then suggest I pay off their mortgage just to free up cash flow. I knew Brielle would ask to borrow for the wedding venue upgrade. I knew Trent would show up at my apartment with a pitch deck for his next big idea. I had seen it all, because I had watched my grandmother leave my uncle a small inheritance 10 years earlier. And I had watched that family tear itself apart over $38,000. So I moved the money into a trust, kept my studio apartment, kept driving my 2013 Toyota Corolla with the cracked rear bumper, and told exactly 4 people in my life: Priya, my therapist, my accountant, and my best friend Jordan from the warehouse. When my mother called 2 weeks before Thanksgiving and said, "Hannah, we're doing a big dinner this year. It's really going to be special. Brielle just got engaged, and Trent's family is flying in. You'll be there." "Right," I almost laughed out loud. Not "Happy Thanksgiving." Not "We miss you." Just Brielle got engaged. Be there. I sat on my couch after I hung up and I thought about it for a long time. And I realized I was going to go. Not to beg for attention. Not to stage a scene. Just to sit at that table. One more time. And let the chips fall where they were always going to fall when the truth finally got set down on a plate between the cranberry sauce and the rolls. Thanksgiving afternoon. I parked my dented Corolla between Trent's leased Audi and Brielle's new SUV my parents had cosigned. I walked up the same brick path I'd walked up 1,000 times as a kid. Past the same chipped planter. Under the same porch light my father kept meaning to replace. I wore jeans. A cream sweater from Target. And the same old coat I'd had since college. Nothing about me looked different. Nothing about me needed to. Inside, the house smelled like sage and butter and my mother's Chardonnay. My mom swooped at me with her usual half-hug. Half-examination. One hand on my shoulder and one hand already reaching to smooth down my hair. "Oh, honey. You look tired. Are you still doing those long hours at the warehouse? You know. Your cousin Melissa's husband has contacts at Allstate. I keep telling you. It's never too late to switch to something with better benefits." "Hi. Mom," I said. Still at the warehouse. Still breathing. "How've you been?" She was already walking away. "Your sister's in the kitchen. Come say hi." Trent brought the most incredible Cabernet. I followed her in. Brielle stood at the counter, in a fitted white blouse, waving her left hand around while she talked. The ring catching every light in the room. Trent stood behind her with one hand on her waist, grinning at my dad. Mid-story about some hedge fund guy he'd had drinks with. My dad laughed too loud. The way he used to laugh when Brielle would tell stories at the dinner table. Trent turned when he saw me. "Hannah. The mystery woman arrives. How's the world of forklifts treating you? We actually switched to automated lifts last year." I said evenly. "But you know. Close enough." He winked. I did not wink back. Brielle pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly the number of seconds a hug needs to last to look like a hug in a photograph. "I'm so glad you came. It means a lot. Wait till you hear about the venue." "Mom. Tell her about the venue." My mother launched into a 5-minute monologue about a vineyard in Lake Geneva. 400 guests. Estankordel. Custom monogrammed napkins. I nodded and said, wow, in the right places. Nobody asked me a single question about my life. When we finally sat down, the table arrangement told the whole story. Brielle and Trent in the center, flanked by my parents. Trent's mother and stepfather across from them. Me, wedged at the short end, near the kitchen door, next to an empty chair where the salad bowl lived. My dad stood, lifted his glass, and gave a toast that was mostly about Brielle and Trent. Partly about how proud he was of this family, and not at all about the fact that I existed. I raised my glass with everyone else. I smiled. I waited. The ambush came about 40 minutes in. Somewhere between the sweet potatoes and the second round of wine. Trent leaned his elbows on the table and smirked at me across the centerpiece. So, Hannah, Brielle tells me you've got some kind of little tech thing on the side. Is that still a going concern, or did that fizzle out? The table went a little quieter. My mom looked at me with the same vaguely worried face she used when she thought I was about to bring up something inappropriate. Like therapy or politics, or anything with substance. It's still going. I said, actually, it's been a pretty big year. Trent chuckled. Love the confidence. Listen. If you ever want someone to look at your books, I've got a buddy at PwC who does a lot of small business consulting. Real gentle with, you know, first-timers. My dad laughed into his wine glass. Brielle pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. Trent's mother, bless her, looked genuinely confused. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. That's generous. But I think we're past the first-timer stage. Trent? We sold the company in September. A beat of silence. Then Brielle laughed. Too brightly. Wait. What? Sold what? Gridline. I said. The logistics coordination platform my co-founder and I built. We sold it to Norfolk Harbor Logistics. The deal closed in September. Trent's smirk was still on his face, but it had stopped meaning anything. Like a light bulb someone forgot to turn off. Okay. Shark Tank. For how much? $500,000. $1 million, I mean. Don't get me wrong. That's great for a first exit. I looked right at him. $147 million. The only sound at that table for a full 5 seconds was the ticking of the clock above the sideboard. I heard Trent's stepfather set his fork down very slowly. The way you set something down when you're afraid of breaking it. My mother's hand drifted up to her throat. My father stared at me like I had spoken to him in a language he had known as a child and since forgotten. That's your Hannah. That is not funny. My mother finally said. I'm not joking. Mom. Sweetheart. You drive a Corolla? I drive the Corolla because I like the Corolla. The money has nothing to do with the car. Trent let out a shaky laugh that was supposed to sound cool and did not. Okay. Prove it. Because that is a wild number to drop at a dinner table. That's a Forbes number. People don't just do that. Especially not. He gestured at me with his wine glass. I mean, no offense. Obviously. I said. Brielle leaned forward. And for the first time all night, I actually had her attention. Full attention. Hannah, are you serious right now? Are you actually serious? I pulled my phone out of my back pocket. I opened my banking app. I pulled up the portfolio summary, not the whole picture. Just enough, and I set the phone face up on the table and slid it toward the center. Nobody touched it. Everyone looked. My dad made a small sound like the breath had been knocked out of him. My mother's eyes went shiny, in a way I recognized from decades of watching her cry when she wanted something. Trent's face drained of color from the top down. Like a glass of milk, tipping over in slow motion. Brielle reached out one finger, almost touched the screen, and pulled her hand back like it might burn her. "Why didn't you tell us?" My mother whispered. "Hannah, why didn't you tell us? We're your family." I took my phone back. I locked it. I put it in my pocket. "Which part would you like me to start with?" "Mom," I said. My voice didn't shake. I had been waiting a long time to use this voice. The part where I asked Dad to co-sign a line of credit 3 years ago, and he laughed at me. The part where every time I tried to explain what I was working on. "You said, 'That's nice, sweetie,' and changed the subject to Brielle's agent. The part where I called you the night we signed our first real client. And you didn't call me back for 3 days, because Brielle had a callback for a commercial." My mother started to cry. My father set down his fork very carefully on his plate. Like it was made of glass. "Hannah, we always supported you. You supported Brielle. Dad, you co-signed her car. You co-signed her apartment. You paid for her grad school. You're paying for her wedding. When I asked for one signature on a line of credit for $20,000, you told me apps were a fad. Do you remember what you said next? You said, 'Don't gamble what you've got.' Well, I didn't have anything. Dad, that's why I was asking." Brielle's face crumpled. "Hannah, I didn't know you felt like that." "I didn't. I love you, Brielle," I said. And I meant it. Because she was my sister, and some part of me would always love her no matter what. "But you did know. You've known for a long time. You just didn't want to look at it." Trent, who had been uncharacteristically silent, found his voice again. "Okay. Look. This is clearly a lot. This is a very emotional moment. Maybe we should, I mean. It's amazing. Hannah. It really is. But maybe this isn't the time to." "Trent?" I said. "Stop talking." He stopped talking. My dad pushed back his chair. He didn't stand up. Just scooted back an inch. Like he needed more room to hold all of it. "Hannah, why would you do it like this? Why at Thanksgiving? At your sister's engagement dinner?" I almost laughed. "Dad, you renamed Thanksgiving to be about Brielle. I didn't come here to steal her spotlight. I came here because I'm your daughter. And you invited me. And I sat down at the table you assigned me. And your future son-in-law insulted my work in front of 10 people. And I answered him honestly. That's all this is." My mother was crying into her napkin now. Not performatively. For once in her life. Not performatively. "We did this to her," she said. "Not to me. But to my father, Paul. We did this to her." My father looked at his plate. He didn't answer. I stood up. I pushed my chair in. I picked up my glass of water and took one last sip. Because I was a lot of things, but I wasn't rude. And I said, "I'm going to head out. Thank you for dinner. Mom. Congratulations. Brielle. Trent." It was educational. "Hannah." "Wait," my mother said. "I'll call you next week." "Mom. Not to fix this. Just to talk." "Okay," she nodded. Still crying. My father didn't look up. I got my coat from the hallway closet. Brielle caught me at the front door. Ring hand pressed to her chest. Mascara starting to run. She grabbed my sleeve. "Hannah. Please." I didn't. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know you felt invisible. I swear to God I didn't know. Brielle, I said softly. You're not a bad person. But you grew up at the center of a spotlight that was pointed away from me. And you never once turned around to check on me. That's not a crime. But it's also not nothing. She started to cry harder. Can we get coffee next week? Just us, please? I looked at her for a long moment. My little sister. The one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms when we were kids. Before the scoreboard got handed down from our parents, and we forgot how to be on the same team. Yeah, I said. We can get coffee. I opened the front door and walked out into the cold. Behind me, I could already hear my mother starting to argue with my father in the dining room. Her voice raised in a way I had never heard it raised at him before. I got into my Corolla. I sat there for a minute. Hands on the wheel. And I waited to feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt tired. I felt sad. I felt something that was almost peace. But not quite. In the weeks that followed, my family did what families do when the earth tilts under them. They went silent for a little while. Then my dad called. And he didn't ask for anything. Which was the first miracle. He just said, I've been thinking about that line of credit. I should have signed it. I'm sorry. And I said, thank you. Dad. That means more than you know. And we talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Which was the second miracle. My mother called the week after that. And the first thing out of her mouth was not about Brielle. It was, how are you? Hannah, really? How are you? I'd been waiting 31 years for that question. I didn't cry on the phone. I cried after I hung up. Brielle and I got that coffee. And then another. And then a third. We didn't fix everything in 3 coffees. You don't fix 31 years in 3 coffees. But she told me she'd started therapy. She told me she'd asked her therapist to help her understand what being the golden child had done to her. Which was not what I'd expected. And which made me respect her more than I had in a long time. She told me she'd uninvited Trent from a couples counseling session and gone alone. And that she was thinking hard about whether she wanted to marry him. Because the way he'd talked to me at Thanksgiving had made her see him differently. 3 months later, the wedding was quietly canceled. She didn't ask me for money. Not once. Trent did call me. Actually, about 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, he left a long voicemail where he apologized and then pitched me on a mutually beneficial partnership opportunity. I did not call him back. I did not pay off my parents' mortgage. I did not buy them a new car. I did not set up a trust fund for Brielle's future children. I did set up a small monthly amount that goes into my parents' account to help with medical bills as they get older. Because I love them. And because I've done a lot of work in therapy to understand that you can love people and still not hand them the keys to your life. I told them exactly what it was. Exactly what it wasn't. And exactly what would happen if either of them ever asked me for more. They haven't asked. I still drive the Corolla. I bought a small house in Oak Park last spring. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms and a good kitchen. Priya comes over for dinner once a month, and we talk about the new nonprofit we're starting, which trains women from blue-collar backgrounds to break into tech the way we did, without having to destroy themselves in the process. I am dating someone now. A high school history teacher named Marcus, who met my mother for the first time last month, and who had no idea about the money until our 4th date. When I finally told him, and who said, okay, cool, and then asked if I wanted more coffee. I'm going to marry that man someday. I think, here's what I want you to take away from this. If you've made it all the way to the end with me, being invisible in your own family is not a punishment you earned. It is not a flaw in you. It is a choice your family made, consciously or not. And you are allowed to name it. And you are allowed to stop performing the role they cast you in. You do not have to blow up a Thanksgiving dinner with $100 million check to do it. Mine just happened to come with a bank balance attached. But the real shift didn't happen when the money hit. It happened the first time I said out loud. To myself. In my car in that parking lot, years ago, I am not going to wait for them to see me anymore. I am going to build a life so full that their blindness stops being the story. The money was nice. The peace was better. And my little sister, my real little sister. The one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, I got her back. That was worth more than $147 million. Don't tell my accountant I said that.